Greetings to everyone.
Yes, Hilda, you can start.
Okay, greetings to everyone. I'm called Baikom Hilda B. I'm an asylum seeker here in Indonesia from the French community. Yeah, I also attended the community-based paralegal, batch 2. So I was one of the trained paralegals, community-based paralegals. So thank you people very much for giving me this chance as a facilitator. Today, I'm so grateful, I'm so delighted. So the reason why we have this webinar is due to the pandemic, that has taken the whole world. SUHAKAM in 2020 has decided to have refugee legal paralegal webinar, as a form of legal empowerment of refugees and asylum seekers in Indonesia. The main aim of this is to increase the knowledge and the awareness of refugees in Indonesia and their rights in Indonesia. So you can find the reason why we are holding this at the TOR. So today, our source person, let me introduce our source person. Today, the source person, the main speaker for today will be Mr. Gerard Joseph, a commissioner from SUHAKAM. For those of you who don't know the meaning of SUHAKAM, SUHAKAM means Human Rights Commission of Malaysia. I think I'm at the right track. Okay, I would like to emphasize on this. Before our main speakers start to talk, I would like to let all the participants know that this event will be recorded and aired on YouTube. So all the participants should be mindful. If they are using their video cameras, they should be mindful because everything will be aired in the YouTube. Secondly, I will also like that all the participants should drop their questions on the chat box. So people should really take note of this because this event will be recorded and aired on YouTube. So be mindful of the way you use your camera, and also any question you want to ask in this session should be dropped on the chat box. Again, am I supposed to say? Is there any remark based on the term of reference? If there is none, then we should proceed.
There will be remark from Rizka, Hilda.
Okay.
Hi, should I start the remarks? Okay then. Thank you, Hilda. Good afternoon. Good afternoon for all of us. Today we are attending the Refugee Legal Aid webinar series, and this is the 8th session. So we hope that each month that we can get one session to talk about everything related to legal issues in refugee context. So one of the context is one of the issue in refugee context is the livelihood, and livelihood is a basic right of all people. Yeah, understand that. It entitled without considering nationality. In Indonesia, regulation said that refugee cannot work. However, it doesn't mean that refugee cannot fulfill their basic needs. Along the way, we learned that we can do things to support our lives, but we still have to look for other success story, I guess, to enhance our life in transit. And as a service provider, SUHAKAM wanted to go further for the benefit of refugees staying in Indonesia. One of the ways is to learn how to do it from another neighbor country, Malaysia, that we already read and listened actually in the news about their project to enhance refugee lives there. And surely SUHAKAM doesn't want to get this information alone. So therefore, we also invite all refugees and service providers today to listen and taking benefit from today's discussion and working together, surely afterwards, for the better future. Lastly, I guess I won't take time too long. I thank you very much for Gerald Joseph, Commissioner at SUHAKAM Malaysia. Don't get switched with SUHAKAM, it's SUHAKAM in Malaysia. Indonesia, it's SUHAKA. I thank you very much for making the time to have discussion with us. And it is wonderful to have you today in here in the session. And surely thank you, Hilda, our alumni of Paralegal Training Batch 2, who are the moderator for today. It's great to have you here, our alumni, to be active in each session. I'm sure that today's discussion will be benefiting for all of us. And I thank you very much. Have a great discussion. Back to you, Hilda. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that remark. Thank you for trying for enlightening some of the people to know what we are here today. I'm so grateful, and also thank you for welcoming me. I'm so delighted, and it's my pleasure to be here with you people today. I'm so happy. So we have to continue with the message for today. So I will call on our main speaker for the day, Mr. Gerald Joseph, to bring the material for today, the presentation from the source person, which is Mr. Gerald. Hi, Mr. Gerald, you're highly welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Hilda. Good to hear you and meet you and to hear your strength. Good afternoon to friends at SUHAKA, Rizka, Julio, and others who are meeting for the first time. Good to always work together with our Indonesian friends. Even our name, SUHAKAM, is not very far from SUHAKA, so we must be close. And today I'm here. I'm also happy to note that there are other SUHAKAM colleagues with me. Some senior officers are also here, and some of them may contribute in the discussion with their experience too. This discussion is not an easy discussion, and I'm sure the asylum seekers here can probably give you more reality on what's the situation in both Indonesia and Malaysia. So in Malaysia, the Human Rights Commission is a national body, a statutory function under the Act of Parliament, and we have the role to advise government to improve their laws and policy to be in line with human rights, to receive complaints on human rights issues, to promote human rights education, to tell government it's time to comply, ratify its national standards. So it's similar to Komnas HAM in Indonesia, which is our sister organization in Indonesia. So the issue of refugee has come to our focus and concern for the last many years because this is a big issue and a big reality all over the world. So I think this is not new. Who is a refugee? Someone who, not by choice, out of no choice. This is important because many Malaysians don't understand that. They feel a refugee is similar to a migrant worker who comes looking for a job, and we are trying to tell them it's two different tracks. Someone who runs away because of the well-founded fear of being persecuted, and the reasons could be a variety of reasons, including race, religion, nationality, social group, political opinion. And this person is outside the country of nationality and is unable, because of that fear, or unwilling to avail himself of the protection of that country, which means that You only run away because you want to protect your life yourself, and you have no choice. And at this moment, your country is not able to give you such protection. So in Malaysia, there are official figures, and this is the best figures we've got so far from the UNHCR body here. 178,715 refugees in Malaysia. 24% are children below 18. 68% are men. The rest are women. The top five countries. Of course, the largest number we have is the Rohingya population. Then the others, Myanmar, but other ethnic group could be Chin, Karen, Shan, many other groups, right? Pakistani 6,600, Yemen 3,650, Syria 3,250, Somalia 3,230. There is a breakdown of other numbers, but we just picked the top five. So you can give a guess on what may be the reasons our friends are forced to flee their country. Rohingyas, you can know the other states of Myanmar, still some armed struggle with the central military of Myanmar. Pakistan, it could be ranging from minorities, both religious issue or ethnic group, and then the others are war situation. So it is not a pretty picture on the reasons why people go. So when I meet someone like Hilda, I know it's not easy to leave your home country, and the others are also here. So another area of difficulty in Malaysia is because we are not a party to the Refugee Convention. We never ratified this convention. So we don't have an asylum system in place to manage, to regulate asylum seekers and refugees in the country. So at best, it has been what I call a compassionate approach, that we allow, the government says, yes, fine, let's help. But it's a close one door, open another door kind of policy, which is good because there are so many refugees here, but it's not good because there's no system on when and how they manage themselves here. And strangely, the only present law we have is the law of managing anybody foreigner who doesn't have documents, so undocumented migrants. So if you, a refugee obviously has no proper documents. Some have their old passport, but many run out and may not even have any document. And so the first instance, the police sees you, no document, you get arrested and detained for immigration offenses. And then the only way you can sort of be verified that you are not like others who came here to work and you did not use the proper channel, so you are so-called illegal worker here. Only the UNHCR at this present moment can go in and verify and check if it's true you're an asylum seeker or not. But even that has challenges and difficulty, which I will speak to you a little bit more about later, about the UNHCR process in Malaysia. Refugees have no access to legal employment. I think you may know that already by now, because we don't have a system of management of refugees. So including employment, how to manage, how to work. So then you ask a question, but you have almost 200,000 refugees in Malaysia. So how do they do? Do they live on sunshine and fresh air? No, they are like you and me, human beings. They need food, they need to seek some money because the government does not give them food. So they work. And how do they work? They work in jobs informally. So many of these jobs, the word normally is dirty, dangerous, difficult jobs or informal sector jobs. And there is no, you cannot find their name on any legal register. So it's just by word of mouth. Okay, I employ you, you work so much, I pay you so much. That's all. So if you get cheated, then they say, well, too bad, that's it. No, nowhere for you to complain. Because if you do complain, an employer cheated you, then the immigration will say, but you're not supposed to work. Why did you work? And that's an offense, right? The other one is the children do not have access to formal education. So there are refugees who the Commission SUHAKAM has met, who've lived here almost 30 years. There is a group of Rohingyas that came in the last few years, as we know about the recent big move that they went over to Cox's Bazar. But there was also a big move about 30 years ago of the Rohingyas, and they had already run out first round. So they have been here, and there are small babies and children who are now grown up, 18, 19, 20, and it's very sad when you talk to them. The commission met the community in the north, only to be told that I could only go to a small NGO school for 3-4 years, and then I cannot study anymore. And even if you manage to go to an NGO school until 15, then you have no chance to go and get a diploma or a degree. And this is sad because when things get better in Arakan state and the Rohingyas can go home, there is a whole generation who will not have formal education and they will suffer. So then the access to healthcare facilities are allowed in Malaysia, but we have a 3-tier system. Malaysians who go to hospital get fully subsidized. So we pay 1 ringgit. 1 ringgit is like 25 cents, US cents. So maybe I think 3,000 rupiah, if I'm not mistaken. Then, but for a foreigner in the country, you need to pay double. But for a refugee, you pay in between, half and half. But even that, for a person who doesn't have work and gets very little, the cost is a lot. So, for example, for a mother to give birth to a baby, what we found out is they need to collect the money, minimum 2,500 ringgit in order to give birth in a hospital. And they said they have no choice. The rest, mostly if they got a choice, they will buy medicine from the pharmacy and take care of their own self. Okay, the commission, as we can receive complaints, so we receive a whole range of complaints from refugees, meaning refugees who have got their cases already submitted to UNHCR. So some of their cases could be also they are unhappy that their cases have not got a result from UNHCR. Either they're waiting for an answer, or either they're rejected, or they're not resettled. So some of this is beyond even our jurisdiction. So we then take it to UNHCR to get some information. So the refugee status determination of the UNHCR is a very independent process, and we don't, if they decide based on their criteria, then we don't get involved, but at least we try to get information to inform the refugees. But also, I think sometimes you can appeal, sometimes you can try your best to explain your case with new information. I think that's how the UNHCR works. But this is complaints of refugees from the countries mentioned. But there's another big group of complaints not in this data, and they could be as much as maybe ranging from about 150 to 200 complaints a year about people without documents in the state of Sabah. And I think later maybe some of our colleagues from Sabah, SUHAKAM, can share if they want to, about families who are now third generation who have no documents, and some of them have come in here as refugees in the early 1970s because of the civil war in the south of Philippines at that time. So they have lived here, the third generation, but without documentation. They are called stateless, but their original claim as refugees have never been managed well. So even their second or third generation is not clear what identification they have and how they're going to live. Because some of them also have no more connection with the home country. Some have lost contact. So this is another serious issue for them. So type of complaints is about arrests, detention, because they get arrested, they go to the immigration, they wait for a long time for UNHCR to be allowed in. And at this present moment, there is a big problem in Malaysia because the government of Malaysia, the immigration department, has stopped the UNHCR from accessing the immigration depots for more than a year now, I think almost 20 months. No, almost 16 to 17 months because the government said they're trying to come up with their own policy. But it's not fair, because why are asylum seekers then kept in detention when they have nowhere else to go to be deported or sent home to? Like the Rohingyas, they have stateless and they have nowhere to send. So why keep them in detention for so long? Also, sometimes in Malaysia you may have a UNHCR card, but still you can be arrested, and sometimes it takes 4 or 5 days for the police to verify, because it's still a very old system of sending a form and sending a letter. Although the card is already a UNHCR card, and now there is an application and apps that the UN has created that you can easily check if it's genuine or not. Another complaint is about the forced eviction. This we went to see 5 families, I think, beginning of last year, that were thrown out of, or end of 2019, they were thrown out of their houses that they've been renting from a small town in the north of Malaysia, because the Malaysian landlords became frightful and started saying this is dangerous because you might be arrested. So overnight they were all just asked to go out, and they lived in under the plantation for a night, and other people were helping them for that night. But that's because of the growing xenophobia also in Malaysia. During the COVID-19, there's a lot of anger against foreigners, and this is not good for them. Questions of mistreatment and harassment. So roadblocks, police will ask, so issue of corruption, sometimes raids by enforcement agencies. So even if you have a card, you don't have a card, you're just seen as a person without documents, so it's considered illegal and you get arrested. So there's no differentiation of who you are. And then, as I mentioned about the xenophobia, this is online. Shockingly, Malaysia in the last 1 year has suffered COVID like Indonesia and other countries, but also suffered a growth of xenophobia. And because Malaysia is quite compassionate to the Rohingyas for a long period of time, very supportive, helpful, but suddenly the mood changed during COVID. Yeah. So I think COVID virus is not just about a virus on the body, but it also has a virus on the attitude, and that's sad. Yeah? And on this part, even SUHAKAM has been attacked online quite badly, because we take up positions, human rights position, on refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants. Then on the issue of work, because they can't work legally, so some of them, many of them are blue collar workers. So not a regular income, daily wage, and that's why they live in difficult conditions. They cramp up the house, share food, and they also education, healthcare is a big issue. Refugees are unable, as I mentioned earlier, to get a decent wage. In some cases, this is to the advantage of the Malaysian refugees, because the employer can pay lower and know that they can exploit, because nobody can take a case against them, because the refugee don't have the power to complain because it's not allowed to work. Yeah. So also they got no proof because they're not in any register, and so no employer will also admit that they employed. So it's a very tough situation. Many Malaysians have tried to get permission to help some of these refugees to get work, daily work, but there is no system that gives permission. Malaysian government's tested one system of employment by getting a bread factory to employ the Rohingya refugees in the city, and it worked quite well. One round of tests, because they could work there and then go home to their community and work there. That worked. They tried another example where they got a group of Rohingya workers to work in a plantation far away from the city, but that did not work because the Rohingyas taken away from their family, from their community, all came back to their home, and then so that was a failure. And the governments blame the Rohingyas for not wanting to work hard, and that's not true. I think the refugees and asylum seekers are probably the most hardworking people to try to make ends meet. But because you take them away from their family, the community is tough, so they came back to their family. So I think that's what I mentioned about the plantation. But we are hoping that in the manufacturing company, more companies can take them on. That will be a good help. They're not able to afford the healthcare, as I mentioned earlier. So this is problematic because then preventive disease, early diagnosis, by the time they go in, it's quite serious because they don't have the money and they feel they can self-medicate on their own. No? So serious disabilities and health issues will also lead them to more socioeconomic problems, right? So as I said, the 50% discount of foreigners rate for refugees. So it looks like it's, wow, 50% is a good discount, but not for a poor refugee. That's still a lot. And so we need to find a solution to tell the Malaysian government that it's not about the discount looks good, but this is about people who cannot legally work. If you allow them legal work, then this discount is a great discount. But if you don't allow them legal work, then this is not a great discount. Yeah? And also many countries or Malaysians will say, why should we bear the cost for refugees? They are foreigners. Well, if you ask any refugee or asylum seeker, why would they want to leave their beautiful home village or home country? That's their home country and they want to be there. They are forced to flee. And so when someone is forced to flee, he did not make a choice, but he or she ran away to save themselves. So this is something that is a very strange question asked by many Malaysians who don't understand what a refugee is. Yeah? So in Malaysia, only 44% of refugee children are in primary education, 23% refugees are in secondary school. But all these are basically NGO type schools, right? It's not the formal school system. It's still a small number and they're only there for a few years. Depends on how many schools are there. So issue of access, many children still have no access, although they live, Klang Valley is the capital city, Kuala Lumpur is. Although you are in the capital, there's still no access. So it's funny, right? In the capital city, like in Jakarta, all the big roads, the trains or the buses, but you still have no access because they have no schools. So learning centers is what many people have come, but even that is really depends on the NGOs and it's not for long term and it's just a sample size of the refugee population. So access for girl child in education is not, is really even a more bigger cultural issue for the Rohingya community. I'm not sure about other communities, but it's a cultural issue that girl education is not on the top priority. Malaysia, we also have realized that child marriage is also still quite rampant among the Rohingya community because it's a cultural norm from the villages or towns that they came. But there must be some education process to have the child have some education before marriage. And refugees, you know, if their main thing is to survive, then maybe education is not the top priority. So even learning centers are because of the goodwill of people and it's not long-term, not self-sufficient. And also if you try to get a Rohingya community to set up something, they need resources and that's not a regular resource. So many gaps. And this is, I mentioned earlier, how can they move up to get a secondary education school, a diploma, a certificate? This is going to alienate a whole generation in the future. Then the question of part of our work is to meet with different government agencies, ministries, meetings with the UN, NGOs, INGOs, also to push the government, why not, it's time for alternative detention because children should not be detained, but children are still detained in Malaysia, sadly. Yeah? So in our commission, we have a children's commissioner focusing also on this now, and she's working hard with the government. But despite all agreement and promises by the last 3 successive governments, children are still being detained in Malaysia. The other work we do, I think, although this is about livelihood, but part of their fear is the arrest. And then when they get to detention center, what happens to them, right? So conditions in detention center are not great. So, and we ask the question, why must asylum seekers and refugees be detained? If you're an economic migrant worker and you don't have proper documents, you are legally wrong by the law, so you will be detained and you will be deported. That's different. But when this is for those who have already come here seeking for refuge, why should they be detained? At present, there is a group of, I'm not sure, a few hundred, almost 1,000 Rohingyas in an immigration detention camp that they came via the boat. And I'm still not sure. It defies all logic. Why would the Malaysian government keep them detained when you know you can never deport them back to Myanmar at this present situation? What do? You cannot deport them to Cox's Bazar because Cox's Bazar is a refugee camp in another country in Bangladesh. So how can you think suddenly you can deport them anywhere? But why keep them detained? This is unlawful because they've not even been brought to a court. They've been kept on over and over for long periods of time, and this must stop. Yeah. We also meet with the communities that try to get issues on how they live, right? Yeah. So an example, we met Rohingya community. So these are some examples. So it's a small area, 500 people, 300 families, mainly the Rohingya Muslims. So they rent. So they rent a small house unit. That's the price, 600 ringgit. So they have to earn minimum for that. The conditions, the small units are actually what I call former squatter areas. So now the Malaysians who used to live there moved out, so they are renting out this former squatter uh, urban poor housing, and then they rent. So it's already wooden, bad condition, poor, unhygienic because of lack of drainage. So these are all problems, but now a poorer community is living there. Yeah. So they told us about education issue. Even though it's an NGO, but they still need to pay transport to send their kids there. They are very worried about their children, education, what to do with the children when they grow up. There is no chance to go to the university. So we need to find a way on how to get private university schools to acknowledge and allow them to get a formal tertiary education. I think there's a study being done now by the parliamentarian group. Work, as you know, it's difficult to get job. I spoke about this earlier. So it's so easy to cheat them. Malaysians can easily cheat them. If now I want to paint my house, I invite a refugee. I say, okay, you work 7 days, I pay you, say 1,000 ringgit. At the end of 7 days, I can give him 100 ringgit and say goodbye. And the poor guy has nowhere to go. He just takes 100 ringgit. And this is story told to me when I met one of the workers here. They said, I worked for 2 weeks, promised 2,000 ringgit or 2,500 ringgit. And at the end, he did not give me any money. He said, well, sorry, I have no money. And so he just didn't pay. And this guy just say, I lost all my job. I have no money. So this is something that is dangerous. Also, in terms of gender disparity, they can decide to pay the women lower, men more, but really without legalizing their labor, you can never have protection. Healthcare, as I mentioned earlier, the cost of medical treatment is unaffordable. I told you about if a mother wants to give birth to a child, you get the community to contribute in order for her to get to a hospital, a government hospital to give birth. Then the question is just something that I noticed that I looked at one of the mothers, young mothers just gave birth to a baby, showed me the vaccination booklet that all mothers get when they give birth. And if you can ask the Malaysian mothers here, there is a book that every few months you have to go vaccine 1, vaccine 2, and then you have to fill up and then you have to go. And then I looked at this mother's book. After 3 or 4 lines, there's no more lines. And the baby is already more than 12 months. So I asked why. She says, each time I go, it costs 30, 40, 50 ringgit and I have no money. So after the first few, we just stop. So I say, oh my God, that child will grow up without some of the most important health protection that may have an impact in the future. And that's not fair for that child. I think this is something that needs to be handled. Yeah? So I think these are the recommendations, access to healthcare, formal education. But I think this we need to really work together with private sector, with international donors in order to find a way in terms of managing the costs. Yeah? These are some of the photos of their worry in detention. The detention centers are not great. Some places the food looks good, but the conditions are horrible, and we always wonder why should they be detained in a detention center. So some of our recommendations as I come to the end of the presentation is that our first is to, sorry, the wrong spelling is to ratify. Yeah, apologies. Yeah, to ratify the 1951 Refugee Convention. We urge the government that UNHCR be a good partner. It's a partner, an international partner, to help in the determination. We are supportive of the Malaysian government also coming up with its own framework of legality to manage refugees and asylum seekers. But because they are working on it, they should not stop UNHCR. Then once you get the card, please don't detain them. First of all, our detention centers are already overcrowded. Our lockups are crowded. Our prisons are crowded. Why you want to crowd it more? And now with the pandemic, COVID, that is putting a risk to the detainees as well as the staff who are managing the center. We also have always asked if someone is an asylum seeker should not be forced to be deported, because that's against the international non-refoulement principle. Because forcing them back to their home country is danger to life and liberty. This is really a no-brainer. If you allow refugees to remain in Malaysia, then you should allow them to work. How are they going to take care of themselves and food and their families? This is really a big gap in Malaysian thinking. We are good that from the 70s, we've allowed South Philippines refugees, South Thailand refugees, Acehnese, the Sri Lankan Tamils, Bosnians, Syrians, Palestinians, the Rohingyas, so many groups, and that's credit to Malaysians and the Malaysian government. But allow them here, they need to work, they need to study. That's the only way they can live as human beings. Yeah. We're also looking at I think there's a study being done by the parliamentarian group on refugee to look at the insurance scheme that maybe can be a new system for medical expenses, basic education. And also now the good news is the government has said that all asylum seeker refugees will be part of the national vaccination program. This is a must for the whole world, including foreigners in our country, and the refugees must be part of this program. I think with this, I will end now, and thank you very much for your attention. Over to you, Hilda.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Mr. Gerard, for that rich information. Thank you so much for making us asylum seekers, refugees, to understand some of the difficulties we face, and the material was so rich. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much. For anybody who have any question, please drop your questions on the chat box, because I'm checking on the chat box and there are no questions. So please drop your questions on the chat box, because we want to take some of the question and answer session now with Mr. Gerard, please. Thank you people so much.
Thanks, Hilda. Hilda, do I just look at the question and answer them directly? Is that okay?
Yeah, for now you can just look and answer, because there are not many. I can see only one question there.
Thank you, Hilda. Rizka, your picture is sideways. I don't know what happened.
Oh, let me just ask the question for you to answer.
You can do that also.
Okay, because I have only one question here. Yeah. Does the refugees in Malaysia very demanding for resettlement?
Okay, thank you, Hilda. The truth is, many people hope for resettlement. They have hoped and keep hoping and keep asking, why is my resettlement claim not getting any response? We have asked this with the UNHCR, but you and I know the global numbers of refugees, I think, range, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 24 million. And the numbers of refugees granted resettlement is actually a very small percentage of in the tens of thousands, or maybe at the most 100, 200,000. So the numbers don't match. So the wait list is very long because it all depends on the country. So this is, so you're right, Mr. Fernando, Ms. Fernando, that it's not very demanding. It's just a high expectation to be resettled and have and continue their lives. Because in Malaysia or maybe even in Indonesia is a transit situation where they cannot settle and continue their lives normally. So you live like that for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, you're actually hoping to have a life in dignity again. And so I don't find it strange that they keep hoping. But my assessment in reality knows that the majority of refugees in Malaysia will never be resettled because the numbers are too big, and the numbers that the US or Europe, Australia takes in is very small. But the question is then, why shouldn't ASEAN countries also allow a few hundred or 1,000 yearly to be resettled in our own countries? Why only we're looking always to the Western countries for resettlement? No? So this is another question to ask. Is resettlement only for the developed so-called first world country? But our countries have no opportunity to enable such smaller numbers for resettlement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. The question you just answered was from Fernando. Okay, let's take the second question from Mr. Brand. He says, like, I will read it the way he has written it. Thank you, Mr. Gerard, for the insightful presentation. I have a question about the livelihood contest in Malaysia. As far as I read, Malaysia has issued a temporary work permit known as IMM 13, which give discretionary powers to the Home Affairs Minister to exempt a group of people from being subjected to the law. That is, to some of the moral from the Philippines, Anis from Indonesia, and recently Syrian refugees. My question is, sorry, they break my phone. My question is, given the hard times during COVID, are there any changes in policy implementation?
Thank you, Brian, for the question. So the government has this legal provision of IMM 13 that they have utilized as far back as early 1970s. Maybe later I'll ask Heflin or Jasmine from the SUHAKAM Sabah office to add on to this. The Malaysian government even more recently have used this provision to legally allow refugees to be in Malaysia from some from Bosnia, more recently from Syria. Some have got this this IMM 13 pass. The question is, given the hard times during COVID, are there any changes to the policy implementation? No, there are no changes. It remains status quo. It's not easy to get IM 13. This is a government policy framework. Whenever they decide, okay, this group of people can get it, then a mechanism will be created. But there's no ongoing regular system for IMM 13. Example, if now a South Filipino comes into Sabah, there's no more IMM 13 there. This was an old system in the 70s. But for a Syrian now who comes in, that system is still possible. Possible, I say, because that is a policy decision by the government. So this temporary IMM 13 is a temporary work permit, which means you can work, you can live legally. It's so much better than a UNHCR card. So this could be one mechanism. Yearly, you must renew the card, but what we are made to understand, once you're on the system, just go in for them to check the address and you get annual renewal. I think it's 50 ringgit or 100 ringgit, some payment that you will get renewed, which is, I think, really good for anybody to have this, that they can, it's a you can work while you are here. Maybe I'll invite if Jasmine or Heflin from my Sabah team, SUHAKAM Sabah team.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Gerard. Yeah, I have to off my video since. Okay, all right. I do agree with you. By the way, my name is Heflin. I'm from SUHAKAM Sabah, from the state of Sabah. I do agree with what Mr. Gerard mentioned a moment ago, whereby this IMM 13 is issued by our Malaysian Immigration Department. It is kind of just like a social pass visit, issued back in the if I'm not mistaken, back in the 1974 onwards, during the Ferdinand Marcos time. They have a war, the civil war there, up to until 1986, if I'm not mistaken. So the issue was that with this IMM 13, the Sabah office, we received quite a number of complaints whereby, these holders nowadays, they are married to a locals here in Malaysia. So the problem is that the thing is they don't register their marriage. So the kids are being denied two basic rights. We all know, like rights to education and also rights to health. So these are the never-ending quests, never-ending problems here in the state of Sabah. And I also do agree with Mr. Gerard. There are no changes in the policy implementation. The Ministry of Home Affairs do still maintain their status quo with regards to this matter. It is 1 year pass, renewed every year with a cost of 150 ringgit. And this pass will be issued to the child until 18 years old. So above 18, there will be no longer. I mean, they no longer issue this pass to the migrants who came from the southern Philippines. So thank you so much, Mr. Gerard. Thank you. That is our point from here from Sabah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Heflin, for adding on to that. Over to you, Hilda.
Yeah, let me take that question from Janet from SUHAKAM. Just 1 minute, let me go to the question. This is the question from Janet. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Gerard for the insightful material. My question is, from the perspective of Malaysia, how is Indonesia doing in terms of the livelihood opportunities? Also, how is Malaysian livelihood context compared to the Asian countries?
Thanks, Janet. Indonesia doing in terms of livelihood. This is, are you speaking about refugees in Malaysia and refugees in Indonesia comparison? Or are you talking about Indonesian migrant workers in Malaysia? Can I get a clarification from Janet? Okay, thanks, Janet. Okay,
comparing Indonesia and Malaysian refugees.
Okay, great. So, one of the things that we hear in Malaysia is, why is Indonesia taking so few asylum seekers? It's a huge country. It can and it should be taking more. They said that, oh, Indonesia is not taking so many. So that's the first question that sometimes you hear some official circles may be saying. The second question is also because the Rohingyas have been settled in Malaysia for the last 20, 30 years. So they also have more family and connections here. So many of the Rohingya community from other Arakan state of Cox's Bazar try their best to travel and then reconnect with their family in Malaysia, because that's the longest place. So in short, Janet, my first instance is that we hear so little about the asylum seekers and refugees in Indonesia. Talked about, spoken about. So maybe I am not very familiar with what are the livelihood opportunities and the legal framework. Maybe I can ask some friends from SUHAKA or yourself, Janet, to also inform me and my SUHAKAM colleagues what is the legal refugee framework there. But in Malaysia, I would think we are weak. We have what I call a compassionate approach to allow our neighbors, people struggling to settle in Malaysia temporarily. So that's really good. Well done to the Malaysian government. We have 200,000 plus or refugees, but you then stop and forget about how they live, how their children live, how their health, how their work. Then you realize, hey, you cannot stop the conversation after opening the door and then forget about them while they are here, hoping that they will manage them. So in that sense, I think we are weak on the livelihood context in Malaysia. But also Malaysia, I think, has the largest refugee population in ASEAN. I think we only, in comparison, maybe Thailand would be the other country with a large refugee population because it also has a lot of the Myanmar, not Rohingyas, but the other border areas of Thailand. The other Myanmar communities are also settled there 30, 40 years ago. Some have gone back, but now it's increasing again. So maybe I would only know Thailand and who has more Myanmar refugees, but Malaysia probably is the largest international refugee population. And I'm proud to say that it's good that we have that space. Of course, Malaysian society is not very excited to have so many foreigners. They feel it's a burden on our resources because we're not a rich country. But I think this should be a shared responsibility with all ASEAN countries, including Indonesia. And I'm really happy Indonesia actually has some refugee communities or asylum seekers, but I'm not very familiar with the legal framework there. Thank you, Janet. Hilda, there is a question sent to me under a direct message. If I can read it out, it's called, what privileges should a refugee normally enjoy? There was a question shared. What privileges should a refugee normally enjoy?
After that question, I have another question.
Okay. Thanks. For this question, the privileges is not a special privilege that supersedes anybody else in the country, your home country, number one. Number two, it's a minimum standard of dignity that must be accorded to refugee. So I don't call it a privilege. I call it a basic right framework, a basic dignity framework. So what does that entail? Okay, let them have a document, and the UNHCR or the government can give them a document so that they know they are there. Let them have right to work so they can take care of their family themselves. Let them have a chance for their children to be educated. And their health needs to be a fair system where they can afford health issues. And you know, now in the pandemic, everybody should be taken care of because some of this virus don't care if you are a citizen or refugee or asylum or state. It attacks everybody and it can spread to everyone. So I don't think any special privileges should be accorded to a refugee. It's only basic dignity and right. The only special provision that I think should be defended for a refugee is not to be forced back to home country without the UNHCR clearing that that country is safe and ready for this person to go home. I think that's the non-refoulement principle is very, very important. Thank you, Yula. There's another question, Hilda, by Jay. Hilda, we don't hear you, Hilda.
That's the question I want to take now.
Yes, yes.
A question from Jay.
Yeah.
It is too long, so
Okay.
I will read as she has
Okay,
written it.
sure.
Thanks a lot for your presentation, Gerard. The condition on which livelihood opportunity might increase the vulnerability of refugees when they are working with minimum protection seems worrying. I can see how that problem can occur as well here, as they are not considered workers under Indonesian employment law. Therefore, they do not have protection as a worker, minimum wage, industrial court mechanism, etc. Do you think it might even be beneficial and tactical to put the livelihood angle as business contracts so that refugees are not positioned in a power relation of employer and employee, but more of a business partner? How are CSOs in Malaysia and SUHAKAM is going to advocate for this protection gap?
Yeah. So, well, thank you for sharing. Also, it's similar in Indonesia. I think that's the same gap in Malaysia. The question you asked, it is definitely beneficial to have a framework for legal employment. So, whether it's a business contract or a employment act, the problem in Malaysia is since there is no framework, I'm not sure whether it's similar in Indonesia, no framework for acknowledging a person as a refugee and an asylum seeker, that absence automatically renders a person without document as an undocumented worker. So then you will be detained without documents by immigration first before you are processed. After having processed, and this is where I think Malaysian government can change its agreement with the UNHCR and can make a policy decision that whoever has a UNHCR card can be allowed to work legally. And once they allow that, so many factories and companies will be looking for workers because Malaysia, you know, is a very fertile ground for a lot of foreign workers. We have like, I don't know, 2.5 million documented legal workers. We have maybe another 1.5 million plus undocumented workers. So there's many foreign workers and companies are looking for foreign workers. So it is not that these refugees won't be taken up by private sector. They will be. But at this present moment, they fear if you take them in, you may be caught in trouble for employing someone you're not supposed to employ. So it's a legal black hole or conundrum. And this can be remedied if the government said today we decide that we will legally allow private sectors to employ them and they can be registered and we will have a framework on whether it's a contract or under Employment Act. And this can be quite straightforward done by a government pen. But I think the motivation is many governments in, I'm not sure whether it's Indonesia also, but in Malaysia, they feel that if they allow people to get work easily, many more refugees will run to Malaysia. And you as refugees and asylum seekers, you will know it's never easy to run from your home country to another country. It's a horrible, dangerous, and life-threatening journey. So it's not like you can just next day say, I want to run to Malaysia. You will have to get money, escape. And so only if you are in serious trouble will you make that journey. So part of their thinking is that if they don't want to make it too easy, because then they say this will be a pull factor for more people to come. But this is a logic that is strange because the refugee will come because he or she needs to get out to save their life. So it could be Malaysia, Indonesia, or other countries. But the question is, there's so many countries in ASEAN. No? Why can other ASEAN countries also open their borders to take in some of the people coming and have a framework for asylum seekers and refugees. That's where I think ASEAN is very weak. So our work in CSOs Malaysia and SUHAKAM is actually have been advocating, we have been pushing that legalize their work, just enable that they should be able to work. And the good news is, if they have UNHCR card, you already legally know they exist, and it's so much more better to give job to people you know than the millions or who don't have documents. So why would Malaysia not be better off when you know where these workers live and they're working properly and they can be protected and they can take care of their family, they can even pay for health. So this is something that we've been pushing every chance we get, and I think CSOs also have been demanding. But part of the difficulty is working with Malaysian society to convince Malaysians that Malaysians won't lose their job, because there are already like 4-5 million foreigners here and they work in the more difficult areas of work, which Malaysians hardly take up a job there. So why are you thinking by giving a right to work, suddenly Malaysians will lose jobs? So all these are all what I call fake news that is so easily shared. And many people believe, oh, they don't have a right to this work. Why are they taking our rights? It's not true. They're not taking our rights. There are many big companies that are still looking for foreign workers and they don't have workers. And these 200 over 1,000 refugees are ready to work and want to work. And they need to earn money to live a life of dignity. So you're right. I agree with you. A lot more needs to be done to push on this area. But we need a framework. And well, sadly, I think ASEAN doesn't even have a framework for refugee and asylum seekers. Even their framework on migrant workers is not really strong and powerful. So it's sad that we don't have that at present in our countries. But maybe Malaysia and Indonesia we can push our governments to try to have a legal framework for refugees and asylum seekers. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the answers. I think there are no more answers to take in the chat box. But if anybody have a question to put, please try and put in the chat box, because very soon the question and answer session will be over. We have like 2 minutes to go for the question and answer session. So anybody still have a question, please drop your question on the chat box. I think I have one question for Mr. Gerard.
Please.
My question for Mr. Gerard, do you have any perspective on how to engage the refugee actively in livelihood activities, as most of them refuse to join because they think they are only temporary in Malaysia and they do not need to study to increase their soft skill? However, most of them think Malaysia is just for transit, and one day they will get resettlement.
I think we need to find more creative initiatives to help refugees in the country, because I think the lack of a legal framework should not stop Malaysians or Indonesians from finding more creative ways to enable refugee their right to livelihood. So there has been some initiatives by creative Malaysian people. I think there is one project in Malaysia called Picha Eats. I will share that link on the chat. You can later on have a look at it. But basically, it is a group of Malaysian who doing catering business, food catering, but they work with different refugee communities, like the Afghanistan refugee, the Myanmar group, I think there's a Sudanese food also. So different groups. So you can actually cater, say, okay, today I'm having a function for 50 people, and can I have some Afghanistan food for my lunch for my conference? So this group will go to that community, pay them money, they will cook, and all done very professionally, very clean. So they are not legally employed anywhere, but they get money for cooking the food and this group. So I think creative ways like this uh, actually has helped quite many refugees, families and communities. So I think, Hilda, if we Malaysians and Indonesians want to keep innovating, trying efforts like that, there's still a lot of scope for enabling creating jobs for informal jobs, but within a decent formal framework, like that example I gave you of Picha Eats, and you can then, from the profits of that catering, you pay the money to the women or men who cook that food for that particular event. And that, I think the Picha Eats now in Malaysia is quite well known. Companies actually order the food from them, and you get a variety of different cuisine. Some things we have never even eaten. I didn't know Afghanistan food until I went to a function and they were cooking. They ate, they gave it. So that is something that they can do. Then I think, yeah, I think one of my colleagues here, Kumarin, also has given an example of some refugees making the PPE, that full plastic protection gear for COVID frontliners. They came together, they were making the PPE sets, and that could be another type of project where they can contribute as well as also earn some money. So I think there are examples, and I think maybe we should share with each other, both Malaysia and Indonesia, more creative efforts and initiatives on the ground that will give more people a chance to work. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gerard. I think this is the last question I'm taking for the day.
Uh,
There's one question. Let me take the last question.
Hilda, there is a question written to me directly. Can I just read that question?
I think we are short of time.
Okay.
Yeah, let me just give this last question. Thank you for the insightful presentation, Mr. Gerard. I have a follow-up question related to the IMM 13. What are the reasons behind different treatment and policy approach to different group of refugees? As you have mentioned previously, that Syrian refugees get the opportunity to obtain the IMM 13 pass, while the Rohingyas may not be afforded the same opportunity.
Thank you, Ratu Ayu Asih Kusuma Putri. Wow, that's a long name. Thank you for the question. Policy decisions are made at different international and political lifelines of the world as well as the country. So, example, the Syrian war at that time, suddenly there was an explosion, many people ran away. So, Malaysia wanted to show its solidarity. It enabled this procedure at that time. Then in the early 70s, when the South Philippines War broke out, Marcos and Mindanao, at that time, the government made a decision to so at that time, the
Hilda, sorry, can you mute yourself? Thank you.
So it happened at those particular periods of time. Your question is, why is this not afforded to the Rohingya? So I can just give you a guess answer. Those numbers of the Syrians are a smaller number of group of people. The Moro people, that was in the 70s, long time ago, and they were mainly crossover, just boat ride across to Sabah. But the Rohingyas, I think the numbers are large and huge, and they were worried. As I said, their framework is that if they give IMM 30, everybody will be coming in to get IMM 30. That's the government thinking. So that's my guess, but I have no real answer to this. I think this is a good way to manage refugees in your country, a legal document. But even without IMM 13, you can enable policy framework for UNHCR card to be recognized. But if you want to have your own card, a Malaysian special card to get them to work, I'm perfectly fine. any way to enable legal work for refugees is most welcome. But at this point, you're right, the 100 over 1,000, 150,000 Rohingyas don't have this card. And that's one of the biggest problem why they cannot work. Thanks, Ratu Ayu.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Gerard, for the wonderful way you answered all the questions. Thank you so much. I think I also thank everybody that also asked the questions. I hope you people are satisfied with the way your questions were being answered. Thank you so much, Mr. Gerard, because you really answered the question in a way everybody can understand. So I would like you to give your closing remarks for the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Hilda, and thanks to SUHAKA for the kind invitation to be part of your series, your legal series. SUHAKAM, our colleagues, I'm here with a few colleagues from SUHAKAM here, who have always labored the point how to enable a framework for defense of the dignity of a refugee or an asylum seeker. I think the first area of work that we don't do enough, including SUHAKAM, and the government, is how to talk to the public on understanding who is a refugee and why a refugee exists and what that means. Because without that understanding and compassion, you get a lot of negative messaging. So society must be a partner, and I think this is a long work, hard work, but I haven't seen a single billboard in Malaysia by the government officials explaining, hey, this is our brother, our sister from thousands of miles away. They don't want to be here, but they have no choice. Let us welcome them. Something simple to change the thinking, and that can be done and should be done. Number two, I think any good government, Malaysia, Indonesia government, are governments with good standing in ASEAN and UN, and they know all the international framework. I think it's time to show our strength at home, as they say in our kampong, in our village, how to manage guests who come to our shores and they are swept to our shores not by choice. We need to find a framework of dignity and rights. We need to find a framework of dignity and rights in order for them to live their lives. And this includes work, includes how their children and family can live here, the children's education, and the issue of health for them. Three very basic things. And number three, I think both Indonesia, Malaysia, it's time to work in partnership with international agencies like UNHCR, and don't make them your enemy. And they are not here to increase your refugee population. I think UNHCR's role is one day the world does not need to have refugees. Everybody can live in their home happily. No UNHCR will want to make more refugees come to a country. It's a strange notion, but I think our governments must start looking at them as partners. They must also start looking at civil society groups like SUHAKA and Malaysian NGOs, Komnas HAM, SUHAKAM, as important partners to be interlocutors, to get information on the ground with them in terms of coming up with better policy. So I think this is what I hope for. This is what SUHAKAM hopes for a better Malaysia, for a better Indonesia, and maybe one day Southeast Asia can be a home. It has been a home for many refugees running from all kinds of calamities. But maybe we can have a framework that all refugees can have a place here. And I forgot to mention earlier that Malaysia in its history also opened up our borders for the Vietnamese refugees after the Vietnam War in the 70s. Thousands were here and lived in an island for a decade before they were resettled in other countries. So we have an experience of being open, but it's time to do something more. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gerard. Thank you so much. Thank you for everything. You were so wonderful. Thank you for the material was so good. I'm so happy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hilda.
I would like to have a closing remark from the SUHAKA member, please, so we can do the good picture. Good picture, please. Can you people open your cameras? Anybody who feel convenient to take a good picture, please put on your cameras.
Monica, we cannot hear you. Oh, it's okay. I can give the counting, and then you can take the picture, please. Okay, everyone, please look at the camera, and then we'll take the picture in 1, 2, 3. Once more. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you so much. I will give back to Hilda. Thanks, Hilda.
Thank you so much, Mr. Julio. Long time. I've not seen you long time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, true.
I think we are almost through with our session for today. And I would like to thank everybody. I think Swaka have a closing remark. I'm not making a mistake.
No, it's just a short one. I mean, from all of discussion, cultural approach is important, I guess, for all of us as we are working in the grassroots. But what is also important is also structural approach that we have support within the government so we can work more smoothly. And the regulation, hopefully bureaucracy will going smooth. We might have similar situation here in Indonesia and in Malaysia, kind of, but surely different government, different regime, different policy, different approach. But yeah, Gerald, you also said that the refugee cannot work there, but there are livelihood projects that running. So it was stated failed, but it is already there. So it means that it's one step forward. So we have to move forward also for this, and hopefully SUHAKA and SUHAKAM can also work together, and also the refugee community, we all can work together for the future. I guess that's all. I thank you very much again for Gerald, and also for Hida, and for all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Gerald, and every staff from SUHAKAM. Thank you, Hilda.
Thank you
So much.
Thanks,
Hilda,
everybody.
congratulations.
Thank
Hilda,
you.
congratulations.
Thank you.
First time for Hilda, I guess.
Faziko, Sister Priska, you forget me, huh?
No, I'm not, Roger.
You see, long time.
I'm not
years,
Roger,
sister.
I'm not forgetting you.
You don't say anything.
This is Hilda.
Gerald, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay.
Thank
Faziko.
you.
Going
Bye.
again.
Okay, Mr. Joseph,
thanks,
nice to meet
everybody.
you.
Thanks.
Nice to
Nice
meet you,
to meet you,
Mr.
Roger.
Joseph.
Thanks so
Take
much,
care.
all the participants. Thanks so much, all the
Okay, we have many
presenters.
questions, but we will send that question to SUHAKA. SUHAKA send to Pa Gerald
Sure.
Joseph.
Sure,
Yes.
please feel free to.
Okay.
Sure, Roger.
Sister Priska, okay, God bless you.
Take care,
God bless you
everyone.
too.
Take care.
Okay.
Take care, everyone.